friends, we organized a tour already in November, where I traveled in the Midwest to a lot of churches and Christian centers. I met some Jewish groups as well, but mostly non-Jewish populations, both in Canada and the United States, to give them the story from the ground, to give them tools to understand the reality, and also to filter the information coming in through the media. You all know how horrible the coverage is. The misinformation, the disinformation, the lies that are coming out through the reports from Gaza. And through a few emails and a few friends, we organized a tour already in November, where I Gaza, and that gives a very, it puts us in a very difficult situation, especially our younger generation. Those that are in high schools and in college who don't have the knowledge and the tools to deal with this level of disinformation. And so I decided to make that my mission, and along the way, also hopefully be able to feed my children. This is how this tour has developed. It was very successful. We decided to come back for a second tour, and we started that one here in LA. This will be my last day here. Tomorrow, I'm already flying out to Atlanta, and Tallahassee, and Orlando, and Tampa. I'm meeting a lot of folks who are interested to hear about Israel. Where I start is with the background. Most people, when they hear the news, when they hear about Gaza and the West Bank and Israel, couldn't find it on the map. They just don't know. They don't know where Israel is. They don't know where Gaza. What's the difference with the Gaza and the West Bank? Where is it? Why is it so important? And so, where I start is a little bit geography. In order to understand where we are, we have to understand where is Israel in the Middle East and what is the Middle East. And so, the Middle East, which is not in the middle, it's not in the east. Okay, it's a misnomer. Why is it called that? Who called it the Middle East? The British. The British. It's in the middle. It's between the island, right, the kingdom, and India, which is the east. Right, that's where the east is. This is in the middle. And so they call it the Middle East. All this conglomerate of countries. When you see lines drawn on a map, straight lines on a map, you know they were drawn in one particular city. Anybody know which one?
London.
London! Thank you. 2 points. Right there. Exactly. Okay? In London. And this is the result of the post-World War I division of the Ottoman Empire into nation states. The age of empires is over in World War I. The world was divided into empires in World War I, and the end of the World War saw the end of empires, and now there is a new political structure to countries, the nation state. And people organize around their national identity, their country of origin, their ethnos, language, religion, to create the nation state. That is how nations are created after, or at the beginning of the 20th century. If we took the proportionate number of Jews living in the Ottoman Empire until 1917, then the nation state of the Jews would have been much bigger than Israel. Okay, but that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. The British and the French divide up the Middle East into areas of influence and into new nation states. The British Mandate and the French Mandate. Alright? Now, but just to get a little bit of proportion, the size of these countries all over the Middle East and the size of Israel has a very, very small, tiny part of it. But to give you a better idea of the proportion, this is Israel compared to California. Okay, it's about 1/6 of California. That is the size of the country that you can see here. It is tiny. Okay, it's so tiny you can cross it in an airplane in minutes. Okay, it takes 7 hours to drive from the very top to the very, very bottom, and 1 hour to cross it east and west. How did we get to this? For this, we have to go again back to the establishment of the state. The British Mandate and the French Mandate are creating what will become Lebanon and Syria and Iraq. And the British the British in 1917, because there is a very difficult war going on, and they're afraid they might lose, are recruiting as many people to help them in their war effort. And because they believe that the Jews, there's something called world Jewry. This comes from very deep anti-Semitic roots within the British establishment. They think that if they provide the Jews with what they want, the Jews will help them in the war. And so through Chaim Weizmann is a very well-known chemist in England. He's the one that synthesized nitroglycerin. Right? He actually enabled the British to produce bombs for their war. So he has very high contacts in the British government. He tells them, if you make this announcement, you'll get some support. And so they make the claim, the Balfour Declaration in 1917. His Majesty's government supports the establishment of a Jewish homeland, not a state, a Jewish homeland in Palestine. What is Palestine? It's mandatory Palestine. What is that? It's the name of the region. Who gave that name to the region? No. 2 more points. This is Gryffindor right there. What's your name? Ariel. Ariel gets 2 more points. It's the Roman name, my friends. The Romans gave the name Palestine to the region, Provincia Palestina, in order to disassociate the Jews from Judea. It's back in the 2nd century, Emperor Adrian, this idea of creating a new province to distance and to humiliate the Jews by calling the land after an ancient enemy, a biblical enemy, the Philistines. Okay, there's no P in Arabic. This is a Latin name. Okay, this is a Latin name to the land, Provincia Palestina. The region is known by that name ever since. And the British promise the Jews a national homeland somewhere in Palestine. At the same time, they're making another promise to the Arabs. Remember Lawrence of Arabia? Right? Remember Omar Sharif, Peter O'Toole? Yeah. Tomorrow we take Aqaba, right? If you help us, they tell the Arabs, in the Hijaz, in Arabia. Arabia is here. Right? This is Mecca, this is Medina, this is where the Hashemites live. If you help us, they tell Hussein, the sheriff of Mecca, defeat the Ottoman Turks, we will give you a kingdom. Where?
Palestine.
Palestine. Right? So the British are making this promise to the Jews and the Arabs at the same time. Everybody's thinking they're getting Palestine. And then the British spend the next 30 years trying to undo the mess they just created. Okay, and they fail. 1922, they make good on their promise to the Arabs and they create the country of Transjordan, the Hashemite kingdom. So the Hashemite come from Mecca, they move up here, and they create the Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan. That will be important for our story later on. And what's left of the British mandate is what's west of the River Jordan, the country of Transjordan and the rest of Palestine. But like I said, by 1947, the British have given up. It's after World War II, the Holocaust, and the Arabs and the Jews of Palestine are just fighting each other, and it's unattainable. By the way, the people who are called Palestinian at this time are who? The Jews. Okay? The Arabs are Arabs, the Arabs in Lebanon, Arabs in Syria, Arabs in Transjordan, Arabs in Egypt. The people of Palestine, or the Jews of Palestine, are the Palestinians. Lord Bevan, who is the minister of the colonies and the foreign minister of the British government, writes to the British government the following. Now, Bevan is not known for his philo-Semitism. He is a very, very staunch anti-Semite. But he writes to the government of Britain, and he says, we have come to the conclusion that the situation in Palestine is untenable. We will not achieve a viable division of the land. Because we found that one group of people, the Jews, are aspiring to build a state. The other group of people, the Arabs, are aspiring for the Jews not to have a state. It's not that there are two groups, both national identities, who are trying to build a state and we're arguing where to draw the border. One group wants to build its state, the other group wants to tear it down. right? From the very, very beginning. And a lot of people today realize that that hasn't changed. But this is why the British give up. And instead of the British, the UN will show up on the ground. And the UN will send UNSCOP, a organization that will run around the country, check where people live, do a lot of interviews, see the type of towns and communities and kibbutz communities that have been created in the cities, and they will divide the land between Jews and Arabs. Okay, they will divide the land between Jews and Arabs. There will be 3 parts that will belong to the Jewish state, and 3 parts that will belong to the Arab state. These states have no names, by the way. Nobody calls it Israel, nobody calls it Palestine. There are no names. Once again, the Jews accept, the Arabs reject, and a war breaks out. It's a civil war between the Jews of Palestine and the Arabs of Palestine. When the British leave in 1948, and May 15th, 1948, 5 Arab armies invade and becomes an all-out war, which the Arabs lose.
In 1948.
In 1948. They lose big time. Okay, they lose big time. They lose the Galilee. The Galilee, I don't think the pointer will work on the screen. They lose the Galilee. You see, it's supposed to be part of the Arab state. This becomes part of Israel. The Arabs that stayed and did not flee and run away to Lebanon became Israeli citizens. Okay, so the Galilee is lost to Israel. What about the area in the middle over here, the mountainous area over here? Remember Transjordan? The Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan? They invade what's supposed to be the Arab state in order to deny the Jews their state. They capture the mountain area. They annex it to Transjordan. And they change the name of the country of Transjordan to Jordan, with an east bank and a west bank. That's where the name comes from. Okay, the West Bank is in the east side of Israel. It's called the West Bank because the River Jordan, East Bank and West Bank. Do they make it a new Arab state? No. They remain here and they continue to occupy this land for the next 19 years. Okay, so this land is under occupation, Jordanian occupation, but it's part of Jordan and nobody actually cares. Alright? The next section, which was much bigger, shrinks to a smaller area, and this falls under Egyptian control. The Egyptians don't even pretend, there's no annexation, there's no citizenship. They just take over the land and they control the land. The Gaza Strip, again, for the next 19 years. Now, you also understand that this line over here, this is an artificial line. Line on the map, drawn in 1906, never mind the details between the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. People don't magically end on this line. Yes?
Why didn't Israel take Gaza back then?
When, in 1948?
Yes, when they defeated the Egyptians.
The Egyptians were too strong. The Egyptians actually landed up here, and then they retreated to Gaza. There's a center of population. There were about 300,000 Arabs living here, and so that was too much for Israel to absorb. Israel did absorb small Arab villages along this area over here, but to take the Gaza population was too much for the young state of Israel to take, and the Egyptians were too strong. So they retreated to the Gaza area and they kept the strip. Okay? The people don't magically end over here. Who are the people who are living here and who are the people who are living here? They're the same. They're the same people. They're essentially Egyptians who moved up the coast and settled along the land when Tel Aviv and Jaffa were being developed. First by the Ottomans, then by the British. Remember, there's a rail from Jaffa to Jerusalem in 1894. Tel Aviv is established in 1909. There's work, there's development, there's roads, there's rails, people are moving. Right? Jews are moving to Israel, but there's also Arabs who are moving. The Arabs are moving because there's work. These are work migrants, and they settle along the line. In 1948, when the war breaks out, many of them flee. They go, where do they go? They go home. They go home, they go back to Egypt. But now they're going back to Egypt not as Egyptian expats. Now what are they? Refugees. Palestinian refugees. Okay, according to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, you have had to have lived in that place of residence for 2 years. That's it. If you lived in Palestine between 46 and 48, okay, not 45, 46 and 48, and you had to flee because of the war, you're now a refugee, not just you, but your children, your grandchildren, and their children in perpetuity.
Can you explain how it's only the Palestinians who have this arrangement?
This arrangement, this definition of refugee, is singularly Palestinian. All other refugees around the world, tens of millions of refugees around the world since World War II, have been resettled by another UN agency called UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees. And they also take people who have lived in a place of residence for 10 years, not 2, move them from country where if they had to flee from country A to country B, they go to country C and then they're resettled, get citizenship, and they're no longer refugees.
Once they have new citizenship.
Solve the problem, exactly. Once they have new citizenship, they're no longer refugees. Palestinians can have not only citizenship, they can have wealth, they can have status, they can be officers, they can be diplomats, they can be supermodels. Not hinting at anybody in particular. And they're still refugees.
Why is that?
Okay?
Why?
Because this is how the UN Relief and Works Agency was set up from the very, very beginning. Because the world didn't want to deal with it. The Arabs were smart enough to create an agency with the letters UN in front of it. So the world funds this.
Yeah.
And they're also smart enough to create a situation where these refugees are not settled, absorbed to be citizens of another country, but to perpetuate the conflict with Israel. The best work, I don't want to get into to do deeply, but I do recommend the book called The War of Return. The War of Return, and not Will, Adi Schwartz. It goes deep into this issue and we can talk about it more. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
How is it, through all the refugees and all the wars and all the migrations, how did this, what is it, 600,000 people or 300,000 people, how did they end up with their own UN agency?
So again, so that same answer.
Everybody else is under
so
the other.
they ended up with their own agency because again, they tried at the beginning, 48, 49, 52, they tried to resettle them. Arabs refused to absorb them, right? So Palestinian refugees, or now they're called Palestinian refugees, in Lebanon, for example, there are 52 laws in Lebanon prohibiting Palestinians from working, from studying, from leaving the refugee camp. It's essentially an apartheid against Palestinians in these countries. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, the Gulf states,
Yeah.
Egypt. Only Jordan naturalized them and made them citizens.
Kuwait.
But they're still refugees. Right? They're citizens of Jordan, but they're also Palestinian refugees. The world didn't want to deal with it. The Arabs were smart enough to create this mechanism, and so that's how it's left in perpetuity. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do recommend reading The War of Return, and not Wilf, Adi Schwartz, the most important book written about the conflict until October 7th. Okay?
What's the name of
The War of Return. The War of Return. This is how the situation was left for the next 19 years. I'm talking now to the young people who don't know their history. Okay? And this is for also the people that argue with you who got their degree from TikTok University. Okay? They don't, they're very prestigious, very popular, right? They saw a meme to become expert, right? They saw a 20-second rampage and now they know everything. 19 years, this is the situation. 1967, a preemptive war against Israel, and Israel triples in size. Israel triples in size. For the first time, we have what we call strategic depth. We defeat the Egyptian army, we defeat the Jordanian army, we defeat the Syrian army, and now we're no longer the small, meek, weak little boy in the neighborhood. Now we're the really strong guy. We are the guy that can defeat all our enemies at once. How amazing are we? How strong are we? This gives Israelis a sense of confidence they never had. It gives Jews around the world, those of you who are old enough to remember, a jolt of pride and a sense of strength, security, and safety among their neighbors. It also makes Israelis a little bit arrogant. I know you can't believe it because none of you have ever met an arrogant Israeli. I know. But it's true. Okay, it's true. It gave Israelis a sense of arrogance which was going to be shattered in 1973. Okay, but I want to fast forward because this is not a history of all of Israel. These are the borders that last until 1979 when we make a peace treaty with Egypt on the foundation of the land for peace formula. We give up land and then we receive peace. Okay? And this happened in 1979. In 1982, we get out of Sinai, and these are the borders of Israel until today. The border over here, again, go back to the 1906 line between the British and the Ottomans, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, and now you understand where everything is.
Why didn't they take Gaza?
That's a really good question. Begin didn't want to, and the Egyptians didn't want to even more. Okay, it was suggested, but for Sadat it was a deal breaker. Okay, it was a deal breaker. He knew then what we know today. Okay, he knew then what we know today. They didn't want to take it. This is a Palestinian issue. We're not touching that with a 10-foot pole. All right, and Begin wanted the deal more than he wanted Gaza. So we kept Gaza, but we only kept Gaza until 2005. Okay, in 2005, before we get to 2005, the next stage after the Egyptian peace is, of course, Oslo. And everybody remembers 1993, the White House law, Oslo. We made a peace with Yasser Arafat, with the PLO. This is a process which, at the end of which, again, we're still in land for peace. We give up land, we get peace. Remember? That's the formula. We give up land, we get peace. That was supposed to be the end, the process that will lead to Palestinian independence, Palestinian statehood, the two-state solution everybody's still talking about today. And this ends in 2000 when Yasser Arafat sits in Camp David, gets pretty much everything that he wanted, and he walks away. Okay? When people tell us, why don't you give peace a chance? We say, well, we did. Okay, we did. Send people who yell at you, give peace a chance. Send them back to 2000. What went wrong? So what went wrong is that Yasser Arafat, remember the words of Bevan. There's one group that wants to build a state, and another group that wants to tear it down. That wants the first group not to have a state. We were all fooled. Some of us are still being fooled by the belief that all we need is a chance to build two states to live peacefully side by side. I wish, I dream that will become true one day. What went wrong is the second intifada. This is the second intifada. Yasser Arafat walked away from the table and started the worst suicide bombing and terror campaign against Israel ever. Okay, this is the scenes that occurred in Israel between 2005. Most of you remember this, and I wish this was the worst thing I would show you today. That's what went wrong. But by 2005, Israel did two things that made it change. We built a fence, we built a barrier to stop would-be suicide bombers from getting across the border, and we took over centers of population within the Palestinian Authority. By now there's a Palestinian Authority, there's a government, they have police forces, they have armed forces. We took over those centers that will become terror areas, and right there you can see where the change begins. The successful suicide attacks stop or diminish, and the intercepted ones grow. And we get here to 2005, where we essentially we win the war on terror. All right? A lot of people are telling you today, oh, you can't win this war. You can't win the war of, you can't kill an idea, an ideology. Well, we did. Okay, we did. But that wasn't the end of it, because in 2005, Israel also pulled out of the Gaza Strip. We said, if the problem is land for peace, and we can't reach an agreement with the Palestinians, because Yasser Arafat is dead by now, died in 2004, there's nobody there to actually talk with, but we're going to comply with what the world has demanded of us for decades. We're pulling out of Gaza. This is Ariel Sharon. Pulls out of Gaza, 2005, disengagement, physically removing every single Israeli citizen, soldier, live or dead. That's right, we also took out the cemeteries. That's right. You know, they'll tell you, well, occupation, why is it? Israel's not been occupying Gaza since 2005. Since 2005, there's been no occupation. One of the biggest challenges, oh, what did you expect? You're the occupying force. No occupation in Gaza since 2005. What's your excuse now? We expected the Palestinians to take this territory and the money from the many investors and the billions of dollars that would have come in and build Gaza into a Singapore on the Mediterranean.
Right.
They have the talent, the ingenuity, the entrepreneurship, the know-how, the backing, the funding. They could have done it. We left the entire industrial infrastructure intact. They left greenhouses. Within a week, they could have been exporting cherry tomatoes and strawberries and flowers to Holland. But after 4 days, they destroyed all the greenhouses. All they needed to do was flip a switch. Because they made a choice. They made a choice, remember? One group wants to build a state, the other groups want to tear down that state. By 2006, there's another election in the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas wins, he is PLO, but Hamas win the majority vote. Okay, he gets to be the president, but Hamas win the majority vote. 2006, okay, he's now in the 2006, 23, help me with the math.
18 years.
He's in the 18th year of a 4-year term. Okay? He's in an 18th year of a 4-year term, and one of the reasons they're not having another election is because they all know Hamas will win. If anybody ever tells you to this difference between Hamas and the Palestinians, two separate things, well, Hamas has the support, the popular support of the Palestinian population. Israel pulls out of the Gaza Strip. This engagement is called the elections. Hamas will win. And in 2007, Hamas will stage a violent coup in Gaza. They will throw the PLO civil service servants off rooftops. They will shoot them in the streets.
The police. The PLO police.
There was, yes, everybody who was involved with Fatah and PLO got killed. Fatah members ran away from Gaza towards Israel to save their own lives. This is Hamas. This would have been a great opportunity for the New York Times and the LA Times and the Washington Post to run an expose on what is Hamas and who they are.
In 2007.
Yes, this is back in 2007. They didn't. Okay, but Hamas, first it looks like this. All right, there's a takeover. Okay, USA Today, Hamas takes control. Not much about Hamas. By the way, a year earlier in the elections, Jimmy Carter wrote up the whole report of how Hamas won, and that was a big surprise to everybody. And he even then was surprised because he knew that Hamas is a rejectionist movement who reject the state of Israel and reject the peace process. And he was really surprised because Jimmy Carter always thought that the Palestinians just want peace given a chance.
No, never.
I know, right?
Such a nice man.
Such a nice man. Such a nice man. Okay? So this is what it looks like. At the beginning it looks like a ragtag group of people, like a gang carrying weapons, but within 2 years they look like Nuremberg.
How many? 40,000 soldiers?
Today there are 40,000 soldiers. This is back then, they're a bit less, but there is a popular support. We're talking about a massive support for Hamas within Gaza. Today, a fighting force of 40,000. Now, you know that for every combat soldier, you need like, what? In Israel, it's 8 non-combat soldiers, but let's go with 5. Right? So this is the 40,000 fighting force, but another 200,000 who do all the other administration. You know, we say it takes a village to raise a child, right? What does it take in society?
The problem with that is, if you speak otherwise, unfortunately the tentacles of Qatar have infiltrated American politics so perfectly that if you even speak out against that, like I'm even scared to post that with some of my business colleagues who follow me on my own social media, because if you're not woke to that leftist ideology, you're automatically branded as a white supremacist.
You're a white supremacist, you're a racist.
You're a racist, how could you dare speak to the Palestinians?
The way I present, you're absolutely right. And this is a great conversation to have because this is exactly what we need to know. When I encounter these actions, I said, listen, I agree with you. I want to believe, I know that not all Palestinians are terrorists. There are a lot of people in Palestine who want to live peacefully with Israel. I know them. Some of them were my colleagues. You know, I worked for Tzofan, a Jewish Arab organization. We promoted the employment of Arab high-tech engineers in Israeli high-tech. I work with people in the tourism industry who are Palestinian. I know them. There are a lot of peaceful people. There are a great deal, many peaceful Palestinians who want to live side by side with Israelis. The evidence to suggest that there's a large body politic that's able to actually carry that out is lacking. There's no evidence to suggest this. Where is the Palestinian Peace Now movement? Where are the leaders that speak against violence? Where are the Palestinian leaders who are talking about or rejecting the river to the sea mentality? Right? There's no evidence, so I wish that were true. Again.
They get persecuted by their own.
Yeah.
If they even
So
try.
that's great. You know what? You're right. Where are they over here? Are they persecuted here as well?
No.
Where are those in the free countries where they're actually allowed to speak? So you're right.
The ones in the UK, the ones in the UK are given credence, but their own people won't support them.
That exactly. Oh, exactly. It won't get support because there's not enough large body politics to do so. Okay, so that is a tragedy. That is absolute tragedy. The reality is that once we have those few voices that do speak about this, they get shut down almost immediately. And just like, and I'm sorry to say, just like back in the time of Nazi Germany, you know what is the percentage of card-carrying Nazis in Nazi Germany? 9%. That's it. Only 9% of German adults were members of the Nazi Party. What about the rest of them? They were good Germans. And as always, the silent majority is irrelevant. Yes, dear?
I believe, I might get these statistics wrong, but isn't 1 in 10 of the male population part of Hamas in Gaza? I believe it's 10%, and then UNRWA it's 30%.
So that's hard. Those statistics are hard to gauge.
The UNRWA rate of a male in UNRWA is almost 3 times as likely to be associated with Hamas.
Correct. So they have UNRWA is the largest employer in Gaza, and out of 30,000, 12,000 are Hamas
Yeah.
members. Yeah.
So, quick
I
question.
think it's 10.
Their support has risen after October 7th?
Yes, that is shocking. That is the shocking part. The support for Hamas in the West Bank has risen
Yeah, it's 7.
after October 7th to 80%.
The most popular around the world.
Around the world, yes, that's what we're seeing now. It's the moment that these eruptions, on October 7th, we experienced the most horrible attack against Jews since the Holocaust. We expected an outburst of sympathy. Instead, by October 8th, there were demonstrations to kill the Jews and supporting Hamas and talking about how Hamas is a legitimate resistance movement and whatever it takes, and globalized Intifada and Intifada revolution. All these slogans have come out. By the way, they weren't spontaneous. This has been prepared and planned for a very, very long time, because Hamas, my friends, knows Western media better than we do. The Hamas. So who are Hamas? Okay, let's get to it. This is part of the Hamas charter. Look up Hamas charter. Please go home and read it. Read it. On the Avalon Project, Yale University, you will find the Hamas charter in English. Hamas charter is a collection of sayings and statements that will read to a normal Westerner as gobbledygook, as nonsense, as gibberish. You'll laugh at it, but they mean every single word. It's copied from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and from Mein Kampf, and they state there how the Jews are responsible for the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution and World War I and World War II, and they do this through the Freemasons and Rotary clubs. It's the Jews that sit around in their country clubs and plan and plot and controlling the world, the media and the banks. It's all there. And what is the job of Islam, according to them, is to eradicate the Jews.
And make everyone Muslim.
Yes.
And America and Western
Yep.
society.
That's the next step.
Article 7.
Of course. That's the next step. This is the idea, the exporting the revolution, yes.
Well, how can we explain, beside the bug of anti-Semitism, what is the reason that the world is blind to that?
They're afraid. We don't like to look, it's an inconvenient truth. It's an inconvenient, if the world accepts this as true and truly understand jihadism, and truly understand this ideology, this right. By the way, this is not all Muslims. Please don't quote me to say that all Muslims are like this. Not at all. Not at all. We're talking about 2 billion people around the world, and most of them are not like this. But enough of them are, even if it's a small percentage, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, to be a really, really big problem. Okay? But if the world faces this problem and acknowledges it and accepts it, then the next step is really scary. It means that they have to go to war. It means you have to kind of take away your presuppositions, your liberal inclinations to believe that every person is good. Right? We want to believe that people are good. That left to their own devices, everybody wants the same thing as we do. A good life for our children, health care, a roof over our head. That's what we want to believe about everybody. And if you see jihadism for what it is, suddenly you have to change that core belief. Maybe not all people are good. And if that's the case, you have to go to war with them, and nobody wants to do that. And so it's a truth which is very, very difficult. It doesn't fit your worldview, and so it's left outside. Okay? Now, Hamas, Israel will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it as it has its predecessors. This is actually in their charter. They're going to fight the Jews and kill the Jews again and again and again until the stones and the trees shout out, "There's a Jew behind me, come and kill me." They believe in the idea of jihadism, of martyrdom. And again, a small word about martyrdom. And this is again, when people you encounter who are very much or receive their education from TikToks and social media, and they look at Israel and how bad it is, and Hamas as a resistance movement, and fighting occupation. Ask them, do they know who Hamas is? Don't start shouting at them or telling them facts. They're not going to listen to you. But ask them questions. Of course, if they want to engage, if they want to talk. If they don't want to talk, don't waste your breath. But ask them, do you know who Hamas is? Do you know what they believe in? And when they show you that doubt, you bring them to that uncertainty about what Hamas, then that's your opportunity to tell them what Hamas is and what jihad is. Do you know what jihad is? Jihad is the belief that the life begins after death. Jihad is the belief that our lives here are nothing but a small shell of an inconsequential tidbit of life, and our goal is to reach the gates of heaven. How do you reach the gates of heaven? Either by being innocent, right? And who of us is innocent? Who of us is innocent, by the way?
Children.
Small kids.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, the innocents reach heaven very, very quickly if they die. But if you're a grown-up, the best way to reach the gates of heaven and gain entry is by martyrdom. And even better if you come with the blood of the infidel on your hands. There's a question?
I was going to ask, what is a tool that we can use when we're having debates with Westerners, where it seems like at the end of this discussion is, do we say, well, ideally we would love a two-state solution, providing that X? Or do we just say there's no peace possible at all, and that's the end of the discussion? What can we say that's optimistic and somewhat forward-thinking when we're having these discussions? What tools can we say that, how do we come out looking like morally superior in a debate?
I think that the beginning of your statement is correct. We want a two-state solution. Israelis voted for the two-state solution. Israelis supported in the 90s, Israelis had a majority support of Israelis in favor of removing settlements and giving up land for peace. We wanted. We did it. I mean, that's the proof of the pudding is right there. We did it. We left Sinai. We left the Gaza Strip. We took down settlements in the West Bank. We were willing to, we gave up territory. We gave up all the major cities. We created a Palestinian Authority. We wanted to do this. We were on the way to doing this. Every time, unfortunately, that we gave up land, instead of getting land and peace, we got more war. And so we're now less inclined to do that. But if you can show us, if you can prove to us that there is a body politic of people on the other side who want to do this, we're there. Right now, every life experience we had has been the opposite. So prove us wrong.
What you said was amazing. You said they even took the cemetery out.
They took out the cemeteries. Yeah, they took out
That's
even the
crazy. I
dead.
didn't know that.
No, they took out the dead because we know what Muslims do to cemeteries. Yes.
I want to know, when do we learn from these, what I call mistakes, of saying, we'll give you land, peace? How many more times are we going to go through this cycle before this fake optimism, I'm sorry, I'm done with it? And what do we do about the AMP, which has its tentacles in the universities and in our government? That's a big issue.
the AMP? I'm sorry?
American Muslim Palestinians, this new group, well, 20 some odd years old, and they're the ones who go into the colleges and bring in these professors. So we have two issues. One, fake hope. And can we just be done with that already and say we're not giving you your own state because you've proven us wrong many decades?
Yeah. So the first part of your question, the government of Israel last week, the parliament of Israel, not the government, for the first time passed a resolution of 90 members of the Israeli parliament, of the Knesset, said we reject the imposition of a Palestinian state, of a two-state solution, that is not as a result of a dialogue between the two. Like, they didn't say we don't want a two-state solution. They said we reject imposing a solution without direct dialogue between the two. So I think by now, first of all, I think that already since the destruction of Oslo, the reason the Israeli political, again, the Israeli voters moved to the right is because their disillusionment with the idea of a possibility for a peaceful state. It's not that they don't want a Palestinian state. But the Israelis will only accept a Palestinian state if that can provide them with security. And under the current circumstances, even before October 7th, most Israelis did not believe that that would have been possible. Still many did. Today, even those that did are much less sure. So I think that from that perspective, you're in common ground with most Israelis. The second question I'll keep for the end because, and I'm not sure I have a good answer for you, but we'll keep that to the end. Guys, I want to get further because we really don't have all afternoon and I want to move forward. But the idea of jihadism, this idea of getting to heaven through martyrdom is crucial to understand the world of jihadism. For them, death is welcomed. But also, when they kill other Muslims, or when other Muslims die in a conflict, it's not terrible. Why? Because they're shaheeds. Because they just went to heaven. And when children die, even better. The birds of paradise. They get to heaven even faster. Now you understand this diabolical cult of death. From their perspective, when people die is not a tragedy. But they understand the Western sentiment and the Western weakness and the Western feeling towards dead children. Which, by the way, I think that's right. And so they'll use that. The more children die, the more Arabs die, the Muslims die, and they can blame the Jews on it, the better, because that will hold back.
That's what Qatar did with the far left, with the rise of transgenderism in children, mutilating bodies, putting hormones with the hormones in the children young age to change their gender, so now women, young girls,
what does that have to do with what we're talking about right now?
They like children to die.
I don't know that Qatar is responsible for that, but I can say that Qatar has been influencing American academia for decades.
For decades.
Right? And this idea, and this is part of a greater, well, it's a bigger discussion. But Qatar has been creating these institutions, promoting the ideology that tears at the fabric of American society. So I don't know if they actually, I don't believe that, but they're creating that discourse that rips America apart. Okay, but let's not go into that in depth. But yes, it's a longer conversation. But this is what we're looking at, and this is something that we as Westerners find it very, very hard to accept because we don't believe, we can't believe, we refuse to accept that there are people who would want that for their children. But this is what we have to face, and that is jihadism, and that is Hamas. Not just for Israel, but also for the rest of it. This is one of those truths that came evident on October 7th. October 7th is what I call a paradigm shifting event. The events were so horrible and so terrible that they changed the way we look at the world. The paradigm shift occurs when this cataclysmic event can occur and occurs, and for Israelis on the local region, on the local level, it changed many things. But the two main ones is one, we're not fighting 1967, we're fighting 48. We're not fighting about where the border will be, but whether or not there will be a border. And the second thing is what we talked about earlier, that the idea that there's somehow this magical unicorn, massive amounts of Palestinians who want to live peacefully side by side with Israel. Well, we want that to be true, but the evidence to that is lacking. But it's true also on the regional level. We now see the masks are off. Iran has using its tentacles to circle Israel and create a reality that Israel is surrounded by enemies, by proxy armies, because Israel is the stepping stone. It's the springboard. It is what the Iranians need in order to galvanize the Arab and Muslim world behind them so they can do what?
Destroy the West.
Go to the West. Because Israel is just the appetizer. Okay? They want to circle Israel, and they have circled Israel with the Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Shiites in Syria and Iraq. And in Yemen, the Houthis were now threatening. I saw college kids who are cheering for the Houthis. Really?
The fact that we removed our designation for a while there, I think, has something to do with it.
That's unbelievable. Sorry, the what?
The designation, it was reinstated, but the Houthis designation is a terrorist organization.
Yes, it was removed when the Biden administration started. They took them off, and now they put them back in again. Now they're putting them back in again. But this is it. I mean, they're circling in order. They're not going to waste any Iranian blood. They're gonna fight until the last Lebanese. They're going to fight until the last Gazan to get to what they've done in order to go to the West. All right. This is the second truth. The second change on the regional level that has occurred. But there's also a global change. Let me just finish and then I'll take more questions. There's also a global change. Because what Israel is to Iran, Ukraine is to Russia. The stepping stone to Europe. And Taiwan is to China, and Japan is to North Korea. If you think this is happening in isolation, then think again. Because the war in Israel and Gaza is not the war about Israel and Gaza. That's like saying World War II was a small battle between Germany and Czechoslovakia. No. It is the first step. It's the first step, by the way, of the war it's already happening in parallel. But we need to ask ourselves, and this is something else to talk to your interlocutors, people who criticize and want to go into Israel, and they will start quoting Herzl to you and show you how racist Israelis are and how horrible Zionism is. They will dissect the forest, the trees, and miss the entire forest. You need to zoom out. This is what I do with my Christian groups that I talk to. We zoom out. We talk about this because what we're looking at is a future between two worldviews. On the one hand, we have the Western civilization, the foundations on Judeo-Christian values, our stories, liberalism, freedom, the protection of minorities, the liberation of women, the protection of gays, and human rights. And on the other side, Putin's Russia, and Iran, who throw gays off buildings and subjugate women and rape them in prisons. And China, that put 1.5 million Muslims in concentration camps and harvest their organs. And North Korea, and the jihadism mindset. These countries, some of them still practice slavery. That is the future. And all these college kids who are demonstrating for Hamas, is this the future where they want to raise their children and grandchildren? Folks, we need to zoom out. Israel is the canary in the coal mine. All right? When we start to focus on the minutia of the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that's not what's driving the Middle East. If Israel disappeared tomorrow, will that make the lives of Arabs in Syria better? Will that stop Assad from murdering hundreds of thousands of his own people? Of course not. We all know that. So take Israel out of the equation. Talk about the global stage, the chessboard, because that's what's at stake. Our way of life is at stake. If you think the war is about what's happening over there, I know you know this. If you think the war is about what's happening in Israel and Gaza, you're wrong. It's happening right here on your streets. It will affect your lives. And if Israel falls, we all fall. Yes?
I think a good talking point that I've learned speaking with people who just don't believe what's going on in all the anti-Semitic atmosphere around the world is people, either you believe in God, and if you believe in God, you should believe that there's an antithesis of that. There's a spiritual war going on. How do we combat this? If they can't see, I mean, how would Satan go about destroying our society? They have to think the other way around. How would you destroy a country? How would you infiltrate young minds? I mean, they have their tentacles in universities and stuff. My question is, the Rothschilds were very instrumental in the development of the state of Israel. Where are they now? Why are they not maintaining our protection of Israel? And another point, sorry to interrupt. Another point is, I see, because we're all true conservatives here in the state of Israel. We believe in our conservative values, and a lot of people do. I always get the Rothschilds were the people who funded both sides of the war in wars since 1800s in the history. They're part of the Federal Reserve. There's a lot of anti-Semitic remarks about the Rothschilds, and it goes hand in hand about the state of Israel. It's, as soon as you mention you're a Jew, you're attached to the stigma of the Jews run the world, the Jews do this, the Jews do that.
Yeah, that's why our situation is so great, because we run the world.
Exactly.
No, listen,
So how do we combat that? Where are the Rothschilds? Why aren't we funding or defunding by funding more to defund all the money that's going into the propaganda?
So I think that the answer to your question is inside your question. That because there's no Rothschilds. That's a myth.
What?
That's not a thing. Back in 1882, the Rothschilds were one of the only. I mean, there were 5 Rothschild brothers. Only one of them gave money not to the Zionist cause. He wasn't even a Zionist. He gave money to build a school in Palestine before the British were even there, and to purchase land so Jews who were persecuted in Europe will have a safe place to go. Okay, and he was one of the first. He wasn't the only one. There were others. He was the one that was most well known because he had this and he had that. But he was just one. His family is dispersed. The Rothschilds are all over the world, but everybody's going their own thing. Since then, thank God, there have been many, many successful Jews around the world who contribute to the state of Israel, who contribute to your federation, who contribute to Jewish causes, and they have replaced that thing. The whole idea, just a second, the whole idea that there's this secret Jewish cabal of Rothschild and others who are managing things, that's not true. That just doesn't exist.
That's what the belief is.
So we should not play that game. I know that's the belief, but if that belief, prove it. You can't be drawn down that rabbit hole and try now to prove that you don't have a sister. In Hebrew we say this. It works in Hebrew. I don't know how that works. It doesn't work. But you know what I mean, right? You can't. They're going to start. Okay, yes, we also have space lasers that shoot down whatever. Go prove that we don't. That's a conversation that we're on. The question is, does Israel have the right to exist? Does it? Yes. No. Okay, great. Let's continue. You think no? So I don't have. Stop. End there. Don't waste your breath. Don't waste your breath. Yes.
So when did the term Islamophobia become so powerful in that it was used to silence us when there was real anti-Semitism?
Yeah.
9/11.
Islamophobia is something you wrote about it. I think I hope I get this right. A term invented by despots and used by idiots to suppress free speech. I mean, there's a whole thing. Sam Harris is a great podcast about it. It's outside the scope of this conversation. Look up Sam Harris podcast Islamophobia, and it's 15 minutes, very short, but he really gives a good explanation of where that came from. But you're absolutely right. It is a term that was born in the 90s in order to suppress criticism of anything that is Islamic.
What was the podcast?
Sam Harris.
Look for Douglas Murray too.
Douglas Murray, yeah, you also have that too, exactly.
So if this is the state of the world,
Yeah.
this is where we live and how we use it. What's the prognosis? What's the options of what may happen, can happen, is likely to happen, and how should we go about it?
I don't have an answer to that question yet. I can tell you, you know what, let's get back to the end, okay? I want to get through this, and then I'll open up for more questions, okay? I'm just going to go through this quickly because you know this, and I don't want to scare anybody and give you any nightmares. A lot of people are saying this doesn't happen. A lot of people are looking at October 7th and telling you it's a lie. They're telling you the Israeli... I saw something on Instagram just the other day that I was sent of a man who'd been interviewed by, what's his name, Cuomo from CNN in the past, who's giving this whole tirade, and he's talking fast and bringing proofs and fast, and he's quoting Israeli media, proving how it never happened, and the people who did die died because Israelis killed them. Right? It's the Israeli army who killed all those people. Terrible, tragic. It's the Israeli army who did it. Right? There are always these voices. The moment, I mean, this is the most documented atrocity in modern time. Not the only one, but the most documented one. And there are already people who are saying it didn't happen. So why don't you take a picture of this screen?
Oh yes, seen it.
Take a picture of the screen.
Documented by the perpetrator.
Yes. I'm not going to show you. I'm not going to show you the pictures. I'm not going to show you the videos. But I want you to take a picture of the screen, because when you encounter somebody who says that never happened, the Israelis did it themselves, it's a false flag operation. By the way, they do the same thing. They celebrate. They celebrate. Remember the woman that you encountered. Put your cameras straight so I can see the glorious of the death. At the same time, they also deny it happened. Right? So they celebrate this and then deny it.
But their own camera people with it.
It's their own body cams. Everybody, and when you go home, especially the young ones among you, please don't look at this. Please don't go to these websites. Please do not look at these images. Parents, don't let your children look at them. But when you encounter somebody who tells you that it didn't happen, then you make sure that they sit there and watch it. Okay, and then film their reaction. Yes.
The film, the IDF that, you know, the 47 minutes.
47 minute, yeah.
I saw that, and I have to tell you, the 80% I saw on these, 20% in that film, it's still not on here.
Yeah.
So I
know, because it's too terrible.
It's too
this one has the most. This is the closest. This is the one with the closest. This is the closest. This has some elements of the 47-minute film. But the 47-minute film is just too much. It also shows people close up and identifies people, and it's just too much.
I think the reason that a lot of this isn't put out is because the Jewish tradition of the respective bodies.
Yes.
I think there's a
We
lot
have to get permission.
You're probably right. Yes.
So what I've noticed is that whenever, like, a lot of social media accounts try to post these images, they get reported.
Yeah,
You
we get
end up
flagged.
silencing a lot of Jewish voices.
Yep.
And I think that it's important that whenever you see posting it for shock value, they're
Yeah.
posting it because we're being silenced. We're being silenced.
This is important, absolutely. It's very, very important that we know that this, because these voices that are denying this, it's like Holocaust denial all over again, except it's not happening 50 years after, it's happening 50 minutes after. Okay, by October 8th, they were already demonstrating that Israel is responsible for the violence and that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. Not a single Israeli soldier has even entered Gaza, and they were already demonstrating.
And
Again,
how long after did Israeli
2 weeks.
soldiers
It was the 16th. Was it the 16th?
2 weeks. About roughly 2 weeks after the 7th, that's when...
Also, I wanted to ask you, a lot of people go to our kids, they say Israel is committing genocide.
Yeah.
What should they say?
Great question. Hold on to that question. I have a slide on that, okay? Because there's so much misinformation, disinformation, and lies that are easy to refute. But you have to have somebody who's willing to have the conversation. If they're not willing to even listen, then there's no common ground for you to even have the conversation. Folks, we're gonna move forward. The fourth level. Right? We said there's local, there's regional, there's also global, but there's also civilizational, and that's anti-Semitism. The explosion of anti-Semitism, and why it happened is not because of October 7th. October 7th was only the spark that lit the fuse that allowed this explosion to occur, but the explosives were set for decades. And now I'll go back to what some of you have commented earlier. For decades, for 40 years, there has been a sinister entrance of ideologies, of Marxist ideologies into university campuses. The division of the world between oppressors and oppressed. The division of any human interaction into power of an occupier and an occupied, of a powerful and a powerless, of a occupier, an oppressor, and a victim. That's it. That's how humans interact. And the victim is always right. And the oppressor is always wrong. And the Jews? In the oppressors. The success of the Jews in North America in the last 2 generations, and the perceived whiteness, I mean, you don't have to go, I mean, you have to be in Israel for 5 minutes to understand that that's stupid. That is the idiotic, moronic, and wrong statement to consider Jews as white. But even looking around this room, I mean, it's so ridiculous, right? You have to be an intellectual to think about it. But this division puts the Jews in the class of the oppressors. All right? And so when something terrible happens to the Jews, well, the oppressor deserves it, right? And the victim is always right.
But does it matter that we're only 0.2% of the world's population? I mean, how could we be...
We are 0.2% of the world population, but our ratio and our success is explained that this ideology places people... This ideology places people in their identity bracket, and they can't change it. The fact that Jews have made it from being an oppressed minority to a successful minority means they did something wrong. They went against civilization. They cheated. They lied. They usurped. They're shifty, crafty Jews. Right? Yes. But this has been true for thousands of years. Right? So anti-Semitism never really went away. But it was hidden. After World War II, after the Holocaust, was hidden. All the anti-Semitism arrows were now not directed at the Jews, but where? Israel. At the Jewish state. Israel became the Jew among the nations. Israel became the occupier, the bloodlust, the blood libel went to Israel. Especially after 1967, when Israel became powerful. The world doesn't have a problem with Jews who are weak. The world doesn't have a problem with Jews who are victims. They have a problem with Jews who are powerful. Jews are successful. That's a problem. Jewish state is weak and threatening and small and okay, fine. Jewish state which is strong and powerful and successful? No, that's a problem. Right? So anti-Semitism never really went away. And the events of October 7th allowed it to explode and the veneer, the mask were taken off. Hamas understood this better than us. They understand the Western media better than us. Because Hamas ideology, when you look at their charter, they put it out there. Yet there are hundreds of thousands of people around, hundreds of millions of people around the world who support Hamas. There are labor unions in Britain and in France that share the same ideas about the Jews. There are Ukrainian nationalists and Russian nationalists and American college professors and entire campuses who share these ideas. When Hamas looks around, it doesn't see itself as a small isolated terror group without support. There are entire countries that share these ideas. There's not a single Jew in Indonesia. But they still share those same ideas about the Jews.
The problem in Europe is the amount of Muslims that they have there.
And in Europe, the population, the demographics in Europe is also changing everything over there. So Hamas is looking around the world, and they knew. At first, there will be a burst of sympathy towards Israel. But as soon as Israel strikes back, and it will, and a lot of people are going to die, then the world, the natural knee-jerk reaction that the world has will kick in, and will start to pulling Israel back. Yes?
Aside from potentially wish-washing or whitewashing some of this or moving off of it, do you think Hamas was surprised by how steadfast the Israeli army has been in pushing into Gaza, pushing into hopefully through Rafah? Do you think they've been surprised by the strength of the Israeli response?
I think they have been surprised by the extent that Israel has succeeded in infiltrating their terror infrastructure and their tunnels. But remember, they spent 16 years. If they didn't think Israel was able to go that deep, they wouldn't have built tunnels that deep. So they knew Israel will come. They're counting on, and I think this is the only thing that they might have been a little bit wrong. They're counting on the Americans and the Europeans to pull Israel back. They were counting on
hospitals, but I'm just, is Israel at least making more progress than Hamas would have? Is Hamas saying, oh shit, maybe we should
yes.
have done this?
I personally I think so, but that's just my feeling. I don't know because nobody actually has that level. If there is that intelligence, I'm not privy to it. Okay. They still haven't called me into the cabinet meetings. I'm waiting for the phone call.
Uri, you also had some great facts about war. How many civilians usually die?
All right, I'm gonna skip.
Tell the kids.
I'm gonna skip ahead. Both you asked about genocide. Okay? You asked about genocide. One of the biggest lies. One of the biggest lies about you hear this all the time. There are many lies. Genocide, apartheid, colonialism. These are the big three. Okay, these are big three lies. Genocide, very easy, folks. This is what genocide looks like. When you look at the growth of population, genocide, there's a sharp decline. Okay, we know this. This is the population of Gaza. All right. When Israel took over Gaza in 1967, there were 300,000 Arabs living there. 300,000. Today, 50 years later, it's close to 2 million. If we're doing genocide, holy crap, we suck at it. We're terrible at it. Okay? So that's number one. No, so people who use genocide to describe Israel are gaslighting. And I want you to use that word. When people tell you, oh, Israel's doing a genocide in Gaza, point it out. No, that's because people know what gaslighting is. That's gaslighting. You're taking something that's completely wrong. First of all, you're denying my agency. You're denying what I'm saying, and you're turning the tables around. What happened on October 7th was genocide. The intent to wipe out an entire ethnicity. That is the definition. That is what Hamas charter literally says they want to do. That's their goal. That's their intent. And that is the legal definition of genocide. Yet Israel is now, the tables are being turned for Israel to commit genocide, but that is blatantly untrue. So this is a very, very important thing to call out when you hear it. Just a second. Colonialism. Israel is not a colonial state. Jordan is a colonial state. It was established by the colonial powers. The Jews are indigenous to Judea. That's where the name comes from. Right? The history of the Jews and the connection to the land of Israel. There's no Judaism without the land of Israel. When Jews in Los Angeles or Seattle pray for rain in November, or now in February, you go to shul and you pray for rain, you're not praying for rain in Los Angeles. Or in Seattle. You're praying for rain in Israel. Right? This has been thousands of years. And if there's anything about liberation theology that has to come into play, is the successful arrival of Jews to their ancestral homeland. You want to talk about indigenousness? Great, let's have that conversation. There might be others. Jews might be not the only indigenous people to the land. That's okay. But you can't deny the connection of the Jews to Judea. And the third one, apartheid. Again, you only have to be in Israel for 5 minutes to understand that that's the fallacy of this claim. Israel has a 20% population of Arabs who are fully integrated into Israeli society. They have the rights to vote and be elected. There are 12 Arab members in Knesset. Well, 14, I think. The Arab Knesset members in the Israeli parliament.
Muslim.
Muslim, and there's also Druze, and there's also Christians. And there's Muslim, there's an Arab Christian on the Israeli Supreme Court. And they're Muslim and Arab doctors and lawyers, and they're fully integrated into the fabric of Israel. And even in the army, Arabs, Bedouins volunteer to serve in the Israeli army. So that claim is absolutely ludicrous. Yes?
I want to point out one thing about their claim of genocide that we all have to know. They're doing this to reduce the severity of the Holocaust. This is not by accident.
Correct.
They are comparing what's happening in Gaza to the slaughter of 6 million Jews by a German machine. You cannot compare the two. And the minute they do, they want to undermine all of our arguments for why Israel exists. In 1948, Israel existed because of what they did to us. And then they come back and they bring this garbage argument of genocide because they want to reduce the value of that argument that we have. So this is maybe one of the most important things that we need to counter. We cannot allow these words to be twisted and have a different meaning.
And I want to add one more. I want to add another element to this because it's also part of the big discourse that's going on today in the media, and it's the disproportionate response that Israel is carrying out. The tens of thousands of deaths, which is what people call a genocide. I heard people on CNN saying it's the worst number of casualties in the history of warfare in the Middle East, as though just 10 years ago, Assad didn't kill 700,000 people, and 400,000 men, women, and children weren't just killed in Yemen, and the Iranians and the Iraqis didn't kill each other to the tune of 1 million people back in the 80s. It's absolutely insane, but they make these claims. A high official in the UN said that this is worse than Khmer Rouge in the 1960s. And Cristiano Amanpour just sat there and did this. We have to call this out because none of this is true. 30,000 people, this is the number which is now quoted to have died in Gaza. I don't know that that's a real number. Because that number comes from whom? From the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Run by Hamas. Now, we know, and you can use this, because we have a case study. In the first weeks of the war, you all remember, a rocket fell outside a hospital, and almost immediately the Palestinians were able to count. The smoke hasn't cleared yet, and they counted 500 bodies. Took them a minute, right? I don't know if there was a list, but they counted 500. The Israelis bombed the hospital, killed 500, and echoed everywhere by all news outlets. By the next morning, it was clear it wasn't a hospital, it was a parking lot. It wasn't Israel, it was an Islamic Jihad rocket. It wasn't 500, it was 50. Okay? Tragic. Let's not minimize the death of civilians, okay? 50, from 51 to 500. So here we have a case where they exaggerated by a factor of 10. Now, I'm not saying that 30,000 is an exaggeration by a factor of 10. Okay? It might be accurate, but it's probably also somewhat exaggerated. It also doesn't take into account the hundreds of people that die every week in Gaza of old age and illnesses. All right? So that's there too.
Or militants.
But the number never includes the young men of fighting age or militants. When you see footage of Hamas in Gaza, they're always in civilian clothing. Never you see a Hamas uniformed person walking around and firing or being shot at. Always in civilian clothing. They also don't have weapons carrying on them. This morning we heard a testimony by a soldier who was actually fighting in Gaza. He said they never saw them walking around carrying a weapon. But every other house has a weapons cache. They go around in flip-flops in civilian clothing from one house to another. In the street they're indistinguishable from civilians. They go to a house, pick up an RPG, fire through the window, and get out again. Right? And so all the combatants are also counted as civilians. Israel assesses between 10 and 12,000 Hamas fighters have already been killed. Right? That Israel in the war killed 10. So 10, 12, let's say 10 out of 30,000, which is, again, we don't accept that number, but let's go with it. That's a ratio of 1 to 2, which is terrible. Everybody, every casualty is terrible. Every civilian casualty is terrible, and we should not forget that war is horrible. Do you know what the ratio of combatant to non-combatants are in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars with the American and the British Army? Anybody know?
1 to 9.
No? Not yet? It's the British Army is 1 to 4, and the American Army is 1 to 5. The global average, according to the UN, is
1 to 9.
1 to 9. Israel, meanwhile, is managing 1 to 2. Again, terrible. I don't want to minimize. 20,000 people that have been killed, including many women and children, is horrible. But Israel should be applauded for doing more than any other army in the world in protecting and minimizing civilian casualties in warfare. Genocide? That's laughable. But yes, there's a terrible tragedy going on, and Israel is still doing better than any army in the world. Yes?
Do you have any details of how the security breach occurred and how amazing Israel's military has always been and they allowed this to happen? Because amongst my peers and our friends, we are constantly talking about how could have this occurred and what are the steps going forward that they're going to be taking to not allow this to occur ever again.
All right,
because at some point we have to look inside and take responsibility as well. Not that we're dealing with an animal, unpredictable animal.
So that brings me.
Plotting this, but we know we need to be at the same time. We need to be aware of how are we going to protect ourselves going forward and not allow this to ever again happen.
So that brings me to my final point, and then we'll open up for a few
And then
more
I have
questions.
one question after your final point is, where is the light? What can we do? And give us some solutions,
All right.
please.
I didn't say I'm coming with solutions.
Or what we can do. What we can do.
All right. So back to your point. How did this happen? I don't have a good answer for you. Israelis are dealing with this as well. How did this happen? The truth is that we were blind completely. Hamas, Iran, Russia were all in this, planned it for years. They planned it for years. They acquired specific weapons for this task. They blinded our eyes, right? They dropped bombs on the cameras that covered the whole fence. They practiced. Unfortunately, a lot of this was visible and reported, but was ignored. Right? In Israel, the conception, just like in 1973, they'll never attack us. Right? In 1973, they didn't turn on the listening devices because they were so sure that the Arabs would never attack us again after 67, and they were wrong. Here too, the belief in Israel, unfortunately, this is something that's been true both in the state level, at the policy level, and the military level, is that Hamas is deterred. That Hamas is deterred and Hamas is also contained. That Hamas prefers to sit and make money and get legitimacy by providing Gazans with a better life, work permits, and better economy, rather than risk another war with Israel because last time they got hit too hard. That was the belief, and that was the belief that allowed Israel, again, led by Netanyahu, who's supposedly Mr. Security, but he has that aura around him, to transfer millions of dollars to Hamas, thinking that will just make things better. They want to basically bind them off. He thought he could buy them off. And that's not just him, that was the conception within the military intelligence. And so any information that came up that spoke differently was ignored. They prepared, and that's a terrible mistake. They prepared very well, they took out our eyes, they took out our ears, they went straight to the communication centers and took that out. So the entire Southern Command was silent. There were no orders coming out because they couldn't communicate with Tel Aviv, with headquarters. More than that, they knew exactly where to go. They had people working for them on the Israeli side, people that Israelis took in to work with them, Gazans. Gazans that worked in Israel. Gazans that were supported by Israelis who believed in peace, who were able to convey to the Hamas exactly which family lives in what house, and where is the security coordinator, and where is the weapons room. They knew exactly where to go, and they went to them, and they took them out first. They were very, very well prepared for this attack, and it totally blindsided us.
Every day, 20,000 Palestinians from Gaza was coming every day, working in Israel.
That's right.
Getting information, taking pictures, and exactly as you said, every time they came, they knew exactly where to go.
Now, what will we do so it doesn't happen again? First of all, again, the concept, the military concept, which was forgotten in this case, but I learned when I was in the army, those of you who were in the army also know this, the line of defense will always be breached. The line of defense will always be breached, no matter what kind of defense you build. And to me it was very embarrassing. I used to take a lot of groups down there. And I would show them the technology and the wall above and the wall below and then this and then that and the camera and the balloons. And then it all comes down. The line of defense will always be breached, which is why, and this is my final point. And that also brings me to the last question. What is the day after plan? Israel will rebuild, and the people who live there also say so. We will rebuild our homes. Israel will rebuild the Gaza envelope. But this time when they rebuild it, there will be no bomb shelters. Because we will not just rely on the fence. We will make sure that whatever reality occurs in Gaza the day after, there will be nobody there with the ability to threaten us, to attack us. Which is why this is so important. One of the biggest misconceptions about this war and about Israel. Right? People saying it's a false flag operation. Israel wanted this as an excuse so it can go and attack Gaza. This is not a war of choice. This is not something we chose to do. We had a ceasefire on October 6th. We're happy to stay that way forever. This is something that we have to do. Because if we don't take away Hamas from Gaza, if we don't cut them at the feet and make sure that they can never threaten Israel again, they will threaten Israel again. They say so. They say so very, very clearly and very, very plainly. October 7th happened once, it'll happen again, this 8th, 9th, it'll happen a million times over until we kill all the Jews. Israel, the Israeli army, will make sure that there's nobody in Gaza left that has the ability to harm Israel again, and then we will rebuild. Which means that the day after, and this is now me, Uri, talking. Again, I don't sit in the cabinet meetings, and Bibi hasn't consulted me in his plan that he published yesterday. What I think that needs to happen the day after are three things, and my model is World War II. My model is what we did with the Nazis. People say, you can't kill an idea. That's false. We kill ideas all the time. Historically, humans are excellent at killing ideas. We killed, and in recent memory, we killed communism, we killed Nazism. But when we fought the Nazis, nobody said in 1942, what should we do with Germany after? Maybe we shouldn't kill all the Nazis because there was nobody there to rule the place. And if we kill them all, it'll just be another generation of Germans to hate us more. Right? There was World War I, there's World War II. Why keep going? Nobody said that. Nobody, after we invaded Normandy, said, oh, let's have a ceasefire now so they can have a chance to turn around or something. Right? No, nobody. First, we defeat the bad guys. Right? We defeat the Nazis, we defeat Hamas. Number one. Number two, just like in Germany, there was a period of occupation. The Allied forces, the Russians, occupied Germany for a period of time. And during that time, they went through a process of denazification, of de-radicalization. They changed the curriculums in the schools. They put Nazis on trial. And finally, massive financial investments.
It didn't work.
It did work because Germany...
It didn't because the judiciary in Germany was still Nazi until the 70s. They didn't change the system.
They didn't go all the way, but the result...
And the Marshall Plan was used with stolen German money.
But the result
so
at any rate...
It wasn't fully effective.
The result at any rate... So that's a good lesson to learn from.
Yeah.
But the result is that both Germany and Japan, this happened in Japan too, both Germany and Japan became very successful economies, the engine of the economic growth in their regions, and today the most powerful Western allies in their region.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, there might have been mistakes done back then as well, but it's possible.
Yeah, well, they need to be learned for.
Okay. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that occurs the day after we win the war.
Yeah.
All right? So if anybody tells you, oh, I just want a ceasefire, this is really my final point. Everybody says, I want a ceasefire. Okay? Now, when you say I want a ceasefire, that is an easy cop-out. Okay? People who say want a ceasefire are people who don't have anything to say. And so they go for the safe answer. Oh, well, who doesn't want peace, right? Of course I want a ceasefire. Who doesn't want that? Oh, you're against peace? You're against a ceasefire? Yeah, you're a Nazi. No. When people say they want a ceasefire without immediately also saying that they want the hostages back, then they're being misleading. A ceasefire without the return of all hostages is a non-starter for Israel. Remember that a ceasefire that keeps Hamas in place, when Hamas can do it again and again and again and again, that's not a ceasefire. We had a ceasefire like that on October 6th. That doesn't work for us anymore. So the future, by the way, you want to end the war? It's not just like Israel stopping is one way to end the war, or at least this time, and until it happens again. But there's another way to end the war. Surrender. hand back the hostages. Israel has to end the war because of humanitarian reasons. Well, that's a problem, humanitarian reasons. But there's another way to solve the humanitarian problem. Surrender. Give up the hostages. And if not, how about open the border with Egypt? We haven't talked about that at all. You know, the Egyptians can solve the humanitarian problem in a day. Of course they don't want to. Of course they don't want to, but that only proves that humanitarianism is not their main concern. Right? And so these are all the kinds of reasons when people say, I just want a ceasefire, they're just throwing out a word, virtue signaling. It's virtue signaling without substance behind it, and it's important that you call them up about it. So with that, I will end. And up here,
Can I put you on the spot? Can I introduce you? Ben, come. Just an introduction. Ben Savage is here. You want
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Ben Savage. Happy to be here. I'm actually running for Congress in the 30th District, which is not quite this area, but we're just on the cusp. We're West Hollywood, Burbank, Glendale, Silver Lake, Los Feliz. So if you know anyone in that area that believes in what we've heard today, that supports Israel, and that believes in standing up for what's right and standing up for the truth, please let them know about our campaign. And I'm sorry to turn this into a campaign event, but it was on the spot. I did want to turn it back to you and just ask a quick question. In the region, can Hamas be defeated? Because even if you were to take over Gaza and occupy it, as you said, and a massive financial investment back into Gaza, you're still surrounded by Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis. So I would just want to kind of get your perspective on that.
That's a great question, and that ties on to some maybe optimism from the end game over here. Yes, I think Hamas can be defeated, and I think the moderate Arab countries in the region want Israel to defeat Hamas.
Yes.
Okay, they really want Israel to defeat Hamas. The fact that the Iranians pulled the trigger now is not a coincidence.
Why do they want
There are
Hamas?
the Saudis. That's over. The Abraham Accords gave peace for peace. They gave Israel, they gave Jews a place within the Abrahamic family. Not Israel, not as a usurper, colonial, crusader state, but as an indigenous part of the region, which is why it was so crucial, and the Saudis were about to jump on the wagon. And when they have done so, the Arab world would have gone behind them. The Iranians wanted to stop that. They pulled the trigger and let Hamas move forward. I think that if Israel is allowed to win, finally, for years and years and years, Israel is never allowed to win. By the way, another way to have peace is to let one side win. Right? When there's a victor and vanquished, there will be a peace afterwards. If Israel wins, defeats Hamas, that will allow those regimes, those moderate Arab countries, to get on the side of moderation, get on the side of the West, and move forward. But if they don't, then the radical elements within those countries will rise. That is a major problem. Look what happened talk about Egypt. Egypt know very well who Hamas is. They got rid of the Islamic Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia, the new head of Saudi Arabia, the young MBS, he's changed the curriculum. They're no longer teaching about Jews the way they did 20 years ago. So has the UAE, and so has Bahrain, so has Morocco. Right? So these are possible. That same shift has to occur also in the Gaza and the West Bank. To change those school books in order to raise another generation of young Arabs, Palestinians, who don't look at Israelis the way their parents did, as usurpers, liars, thieves, children of pigs and apes that must be destroyed. Right? That's what they believe. And so I see that as a silver lining, because none of the Abraham Accords countries severed their ties. None of them pulled out of the Abraham Accords. So we need to look at this. Saudi Arabia must have a major hand in the day after, and I think that after Israel wins the war, they will move very, very quickly. Again, they'll have to pay lip service to the Palestinians, no doubt. but they'll move quickly back into the
Why
Abraham
are they
foods.
so afraid of what's happening with us?
They're all
Why are they
equal.
providing service?
Because they have their own public opinion to take care of, and it's like Arab solidarity, and they have to pay lip service to that. That will go on. There's no that's the Middle East way.
It's a political war.
There's a two-tiered bus. There's the top tier and there's the bottom. What happens on top has nothing to do with what happens on the bottom. Okay?
So, can we make an announcement, please?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you done?
I'm done. Well, there are questions, but do you want to talk about?
I want to talk.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
I'm Pam Suchman, I'm Uri's producer. And first of all, we want to thank Fujan and Isaac for opening their beautiful tunnel.
Thank you.
It's amazing food, it's an incredible crowd. We're just so grateful. And I just want to let you know, to take Uri here, bring him around the U.S., there are costs associated with touring him around. And we really rely on the generosity of our fellow government. This is also how he's making his living now. He is a tour guide in Israel. Tourism is not happening. So there's a QR code there. There's QR codes in the back. There's cards you can take with you. Any support you can provide, we would be so grateful. Thank you.